In the beginning, before names, before fire, before the stories carved into stone, there was only survival. The world stretched vast and unforgiving, a stage of mountains and forests, rivers that carved valleys like knives, and skies that shifted from blazing suns to endless storms. The land was alive with creatures both magnificent and merciless, beasts with tusks like spears, predators that stalked silently through the tall grass, and shadows in the night that whispered of unseen dangers. Our kind was small, fragile in body, yet restless in spirit. We were not the fastest, nor the strongest, nor the fiercest of hunters. Alone, a single human was weaker than the wolf, slower than the horse, less enduring than the deer. But within us burned something that none of the others possessed. A mind sharpened by hunger, by fear, by the endless trial of survival. In these first days, every breath was a gamble. To wake was to risk hunger. To walk was to court danger. To sleep was to surrender to the teeth and claws that prowled the darkness. Yet still we persisted. We gathered what we could from the earth, roots, berries, the scattered remains left behind by larger predators. We pressed our fragile hands into the soil, into the bark, into the bones of the earth, searching for whatever might sustain us one more day. The nights were the hardest. Fire was not yet ours, and so darkness belonged to the beasts. The cries of lions rolled across the plains. The thunder of mammoths shook the ground as they moved in herds across the valleys. Hyenas laughed in the distance, their calls mocking the small shivering figures huddled together for warmth. Children whimpered, mothers wrapped arms tighter around them, and men watched the shadows with stones in hand, praying that the night would pass without blood. It was in this crucible that humanity was forged, not in safety, not in plenty, but in scarcity and terror. Each dawn was a question. Would we live? And each dusk was an answer. We had endured. But survival was never only a matter of strength. It was memory. It was learning. A man who was mauled by the great cat left behind a lesson for those who watched. A woman who plucked a berry and fell lifeless gave her people knowledge of what not to eat. The land taught us, day by day, mistake by mistake, sacrifice by sacrifice. And we remembered. We passed those memories not through writing, not through words carved in stone, but through the living breath of story, whispered from one mouth to another. The first stories were not myths or legends. They were warnings. They were maps etched in memory. They told of rivers that ran too fast, of cliffs that crumbled, of beasts that struck without sound. They told of hunger that could be endured, of roots that could be chewed, of paths that led to shelter. Story was survival, and survival was story. The children listened. Wide-eyed, silent, their stomachs hollow but their minds filling with the wisdom of those who had suffered before them. And as the children grew, the stories grew with them. They became not only maps of danger but also seeds of wonder. In the telling of how the mammoth roared, the teller added a flicker of awe. In the whisper of how the stars shone above the plains, there was a note of reverence. Slowly, survival began to bloom into meaning. Still, each day demanded its price. Hunger drove us to the edges of our endurance. The small creatures we caught with our bare hands, lizards, hares, birds, were never enough. Bones were cracked to suck the marrow, skins were chewed for scraps of sustenance. Teeth wore down, bellies ached, but the body pressed on. And always the eyes searched, for the tracks of the herd, for the glimmer of water, for the faintest promise of safety. When the hunt came, it was not with spears or traps. Those would come later. At first, it was nothing more than daring, desperation, and unity. A band of humans would stalk a great beast, following from a distance, waiting for weakness, waiting for exhaustion. We could not outrun the antelope in a sprint, but we could outlast it in the burning heat of the day. Step by step, mile by mile, until its legs trembled, until it stumbled, until the fragile creatures that had trailed it for hours closed in, stones in hand, courage in heart, hunger in their eyes. The kill was never clean. It was chaos. Shouts rang out, stones flew, blood spattered against hands and faces. Some fell beneath the hooves or horns of the desperate beast, but the others swarmed, unwilling to relent. At last, the animal collapsed, and the air filled with the scent of victory and of survival bought at terrible cost. The feast that followed was not only food, it was life. It was warmth, strength, and hope. The meat was torn and shared, the fat treasured, the bones cracked for marrow, the skin scraped for use. Nothing was wasted, for nothing could be. Around the kill, voices rose, laughter mingled with tears, and for a moment, the fear of death retreated. For a moment, we were more than prey. But the world never allowed rest for long. Storms came. Rains drowned the plains, turning paths into rivers and shelters into swamps. Lightning struck the trees, fire leaping across the grass. Sometimes those fires burned out of control, and the people fled, choking on smoke, blinded by ash. Other times they lingered, glowing embers lighting the ground long after the storm had passed. We feared fire, yet we watched it. Something in its light stirred us even as we shied away. In fire we saw danger, but also possibility. The earth itself shifted beneath us. Tremors shook the mountains, stones tumbled from cliffs, rivers swelled and changed their course. The world was never stable, never fixed, and we, fragile as we were, learned to move. Always moving, always searching, never staying long enough for the land to claim us. Migration was not a choice. It was the law of survival. In this wandering, the land taught us its vastness. Forests where the canopy shut out the sun, deserts where the heat seared the skin and water hid like a secret, coasts where the endless waves battered the cliffs and filled the air with salt. Each place was a new test, a new lesson, a new chance for death or life. And everywhere we carried the same question. How do we endure? And always, through hunger, through storms, through fire and flood and fear, we carried one another. The old, the weak, the young. All were part of the band. To abandon them was to diminish ourselves. Alone, no human survived. Together, we became more than what we were. The cry of a child was not a burden, but a promise. The strength of the hunter was not his own, but the band's. And so, we learned the most important lesson of all. Survival was not the triumph of the individual, but of the group. This was the beginning. Before tools, before fire, before the shaping of stone. The world pressed against us with all its weight, and we endured. Fragile, trembling, starving, and yet enduring. The dawn of humanity was not bright. It was not triumphant. It was not the rise of kings or heroes. It was the long, cold night of fear, broken only by the fragile breath of those who dared to live. And in that breath, something greater was stirring. The earth was not empty. Long before our kind walked the plains, others had come. Other branches of the human tree, born of the same soil, shaped by the same struggle. They were like us, yet not us. Some, tall and broad, carried strength that seemed to rival the beasts. Others, small and wiry, moved with agility through the forests. They had faces that mirrored ours, yet carried features strange to our eyes. Among them, one branch would become our closest kin, and later our fiercest rivals, the Neanderthals. But before that clash, before the great contest of survival between species, the world belonged to none. It was shared by many, and it tested all equally. For early humanity, the struggle was constant. Each day's breath was stolen from the jaws of uncertainty. Even the simplest acts demanded courage. To gather food meant exposing oneself to predators lurking in the grass. To drink from a river meant risking the crocodile's ambush. To sleep meant laying bare one's throat to the night. And yet, somehow, we did not merely fade into the shadows. We adapted. Adaptation was not sudden. It came in whispers, in generations, in the slow grind of necessity. Our hands, awkward and clumsy, began to shape stone. At first, a shard broken from a rock was little more than an accident. But in time, we learned the difference between a sharp edge and a dull one, between a tool and a burden. A broken flake of stone could scrape a hide. A sharpened piece could pierce flesh. With these discoveries, the balance shifted ever so slightly. The first stone tools were crude, but they were a revolution. They turned weakness into power. With stone, bones yielded marrow more easily. With stone, wood could be shaped into shafts. With stone, skin could be stripped and worn against the cold. The tool was more than an object. It was an extension of thought, a memory preserved in matter. This change spread not in an instant, but slowly, carefully from hand to hand, from tribe to tribe. And with it came something else, the spark of foresight. For the first time, humans did not merely react to the world, they began to prepare for it. A tool was not consumed in the moment, but kept for tomorrow. With each stone chipped and shaped, humanity moved further from mere survival toward mastery. Yet mastery was still far away. Hunger never ceased its assault. The seasons turned, and with them, scarcity deepened. Winter was the great trial, the time when the earth seemed to conspire against life itself. Food vanished beneath snow, rivers froze, winds howled across the barren plains. Many perished. The old, the frail, the unlucky, the winter claimed them all. And yet, even in winter's grasp, lessons were learned. Fire, once only a terror, became a guardian. At first, fire came as a gift. A lightning strike igniting a tree, a blaze sweeping the plains. We feared it, but we also lingered near its edges, drawn to its warmth, its light, its promise. Slowly, we learned not only to watch, but to wield. Charred branches carried from dying embers became torches. Smoldering logs, kept alive through careful tending, became the heart of camps. Fire was no longer only destruction. It was survival. It kept the beasts at bay, its glow piercing the night where predators once ruled. It warmed the shivering, dried the soaked, roasted the flesh of animals that once had to be eaten raw. And, perhaps most importantly, it became a gathering place. Around fire, we were no longer scattered shadows in the dark. We were a circle, a community, a people. The flames lit not only our bodies but our minds. Shadows danced against stone walls, and in those shapes we began to see stories. Fire became the first theater, the first temple, the first symbol of something greater than hunger and fear. It gave us time to talk, to dream, to imagine a tomorrow beyond the relentless struggle of today. But the world did not relent. Fire, stone, and unity gave us tools to endure, but still the earth tested us. Herds moved beyond our reach. Storms drowned the plains. Disease struck unseen, leaving the weak gasping, the strong uncertain. Children died in the night, mothers wept silently, fathers cursed the skies, and always we pressed on. Because pressing on was all we knew. Step by step, humanity crept forward. Our bands grew larger, our stories longer, our tools sharper. We followed the herds across endless miles. We crossed rivers, climbed mountains, wandered into lands unseen. Each journey carried risk. Each step into the unknown meant new dangers, but also new chances. This was the age before nations, before borders, before names carved into stone. It was the age of beginnings, of fragile endurance, of survival bought at a price measured in blood and bone. It was the crucible in which humanity was shaped, not yet victorious, not yet dominant, but unbroken. And somewhere, across the mountains and forests, another people stirred. Not our people, yet not strangers. A people of broad shoulders, heavy brows, and keen eyes. A people who would one day share our fire, our hunts, our dreams, and who would one day vanish, leaving only echoes in our blood. The Neanderthals. The Neanderthals were not monsters, nor shadows lurking beyond the hills. They were human, though not the same as us. For hundreds of thousands of years before our own kind ventured far, they had walked the cold forests and valleys of Europe. Their bones tell us of strength beyond ours. Arms thick with muscle, chests broad, skulls built to withstand the harshest blows. They were hunters of ice and snow, survivors of endless winters. Where we were wiry, they were powerful. Where our bodies bent toward endurance, theirs leaned toward force. A Neanderthal hunter, crouched behind the trees, could strike with a spear of wood and bring down a beast that might scatter a band of our ancestors. They lived close to the earth, in caves and shelters of stone, their lives a rhythm of hunt and fire, hunger and feast, silence and song. Yet, though they were strong, they were not alone. They, too, shared the earth with us and with others. This was the age of many kinds of humans, each clinging to life in their own way, each molded by the demands of their land. But we, fragile, restless, persistent, carried something different. Our strength was not in muscle but in endurance, not in size but in imagination. Where the Neanderthal hunted the beast with brute force, we pursued it for miles, wearing it down under the relentless sun until it collapsed from exhaustion. Where the Neanderthal crafted tools with care, we multiplied them, refined them, carried them farther. Where they lived in bands that were tight but small, we stretched our hands wider, linking group to group, spreading knowledge across distances. And so, though the Neanderthal was stronger, we were more numerous. Though their arms could strike harder, our networks could stretch farther. Though they endured winters in the cold forests, we endured deserts, mountains, plains, coasts, every environment that tested life. The earth did not favor one over the other. It gave and took from both. For every mammoth slain, there was a storm that killed without mercy. For every fire lit, there was a flood that drowned the land. Both our kind and the Neanderthals were caught in the same struggle, the same balance of survival and death. And for a time we lived side by side, not yet enemies, not yet conquerors, but fellow travelers in a world vast enough to challenge all. Still, even in this age of beginnings, the seeds of destiny were sown. Language, though still crude, began to grow in our kind. Words became more than cries of warning, more than gestures in the hunt. They became tools of thought. They allowed us to plan, to dream, to bind not only one band but many together. With words, we could pass knowledge farther than a fire's light, farther than a valley's echo. With words, we built invisible bridges between tribes. And with those bridges came ideas. Ideas of tools, of hunts, of shelters. Ideas of the past and of what might come. The Neanderthals spoke too, but their voices did not carry across the land as ours did. Their knowledge remained close, within their caves, their fires. Ours spread outward, carried by restless feet and daring hearts. This difference, small at first, would one day decide the fate of worlds, but in these early days, no fate was yet written. Only survival mattered, and survival was cruel. Starvation carved its lessons deep into the bones of our ancestors. Skulls show teeth worn to stubs, bones show marks where marrow was sucked dry. In times of desperation, even flesh was not spared. Hunger had no mercy, and neither did the cold. Yet from this suffering came resilience. Each hardship was endured not by chance, but by adaptation. The weak perished, the strong endured, and slowly the band itself grew stronger, fitter, more cunning. It was not only the body that adapted. The mind, too, stretched. To face hunger, we learned patience. To face predators, we learned cunning. To face the cold, we learned to shape skins into clothing. And to face uncertainty, we learned belief. For even in the dawn, humans were not only creatures of flesh, but of spirit. The first signs of ritual whisper of a mind that saw beyond survival. Burials marked with ochre, bones placed with care, These were not the acts of animals alone. They were the beginnings of something greater, the recognition that life was more than the body, that death was more than silence. In those rituals, faint though they were, lay the roots of religion, of story, of meaning. Around the fire, when the night stretched long and the stars burned cold, stories gave shape to the unknown. Stories turned chaos into order, terror into understanding. They reminded the people that they were not alone, that even in darkness there was pattern, there was memory, there was connection. And so the dawn of humanity was not only survival of body but awakening of mind. But awakening carried danger. For as our kind grew in number, as our words spread farther, as our fires burned brighter, we began to press outward. The land that once seemed endless began to feel smaller. Valleys once empty echoed with footsteps not only our own. Forests once silent carried voices not only of our tribe, and across those valleys, in those forests, we began to glimpse them. The others, the Neanderthals. Not shadows, not monsters, but kin. Kin with fire, with tools, with songs of their own. Kin with faces familiar yet strange. Eyes that mirrored ours yet carried a weight we did not know. Encounters were rare at first, fleeting shapes in the distance, calls that faded into the night. But the earth was not infinite, and sooner or later paths would cross more than once. And when they did, the clash of species began. The first meetings between our kind and the Neanderthals were not battles. They were moments of silence, of wary gazes across the clearing, of breaths held as the distance between us was measured not in steps, but in difference. Imagine the scene. A band of our ancestors, lean, wiry, their bones showing the weight of hunger, moving carefully through a forest in search of game. Ahead, a figure emerges, broad-shouldered, thick-limbed, standing with a stillness that is not fear, but calculation. The Neanderthal. His band close behind him, spears clutched, eyes sharp. Two species, two branches of the same tree, both human, yet divided by millennia of separate struggle. What passed between them? Words, perhaps. Gestures, more likely. A warning cry, a raised hand, a spear held low but not thrown. Perhaps curiosity flickered in the eyes, a glimmer of recognition that said, "You are like me, but not me." Not every meeting ended in blood. Some ended in silence, each group retreating into the forest, carrying the memory back to their fires. Others may have ended in cautious trade, a hide for a tool, a piece of flint for a haunch of meat. For though we were rivals, we were also kin, and kin recognize one another. But the earth does not allow peace for long. Food was the first weapon in this clash of species. The same valleys held the same herds, the same rivers promised the same fish, the same caves offered the same shelter. Where resources were scarce, competition turned sharp, and competition, in a world where hunger meant death, could not remain peaceful forever. When the first stones were thrown, when the first spears were raised, the ancient rivalry began. Not a war in the sense we know today, but a contest written across centuries. Sometimes fought with weapons, sometimes fought with endurance, always fought with the stakes of survival itself. And yet, even in rivalry, there was mingling. The bones tell us this. DNA whispers the truth. We did not only fight the Neanderthals, we joined them. Some bands merged. Some individuals crossed the line from rival to partner, from enemy to mate. Children were born of both kinds, carrying within them the blood of two species. In us, even now, echoes of that union remain. A fragment of Neanderthal lives in the marrow of every human beyond Africa. Their story is not only theirs, but ours. Still, survival was no shared gift. Time and again, famine struck. Time and again, the land shifted, forcing both species to move, to adapt, to struggle. And in that struggle, small differences became decisive. Our kind ranged wider. Where Neanderthals were bound closely to their homelands, our feet carried us farther, chasing the horizon, refusing to remain. We spread like restless fire across plains and coasts, deserts and forests. And with each mile gained, we carried our tools, our stories, our numbers. This was not conquest yet. It was persistence, the quiet persistence of a species that could not be still. But even persistence was tested. The world itself was harsh beyond imagining. The Ice Age carved its mark into every life. Great sheets of ice spread like walls across continents. Winters stretched not for months, but for years. Forests vanished under the weight of frost. Herds migrated farther, harder to reach. Death was everywhere. In the sky, in the land, in the breath that froze as it left the lungs. For the Neanderthals, shaped by the cold, this was familiar. Their broad chests, their strong limbs, their powerful builds made them creatures of the ice. For us, thin and wiry, it was harder. And yet, we endured. Fire became our shield, clothing our armor, cooperation our weapon. The Neanderthal stood strong against the storm. We bent, and in bending, we survived. For strength resists, but flexibility endures. So it was that, century by century, the balance began to shift. Our kind multiplied, spreading farther, faster. Neanderthals remained, but their numbers did not swell in the same way. The land that once seemed wide enough for both began to feel smaller, and the encounters grew more frequent, more tense, more dangerous. By now, the clash of species was inevitable, not because of hatred, not because of cruelty, but because survival in a world of scarcity left no room for two peoples who wanted the same ground. This was the dawn of rivalry, the first shadow of the great contest that would decide not just who lived, but who would inherit the earth. The clash was not always of spear and stone. Often it was quieter, subtler, but no less decisive. It was written in the number of mouths gathered around the fire, in the tracks that stretched farther into the wilderness, in the knowledge carried from one generation to the next. For our kind, every encounter with the world became memory. Memory became story. Story became survival. A river crossed was not only water behind us, it was a tale told to the children, a map etched in their minds. A beast hunted was not only a meal, it was a lesson, a strategy repeated, refined, perfected. And when those children grew, they carried those stories farther, binding one generation to the next with invisible cords of wisdom. This was our strength, not muscle, not brute force, but the ability to share, to learn, to pass the torch of knowledge beyond the moment. The Neanderthals, though strong, carried their wisdom within smaller groups. Their stories may have been rich, their skills sharp, but they spread less widely. What was known in one valley might never reach the next. What was mastered in one generation might not pass beyond a single cave. We were not better hunters. We were not stronger warriors, but we were better at remembering. And in survival, memory is power. The hunts grew larger. No longer were we content to chase the antelope or corner the deer. With cooperation, with strategy, with persistence, we turned our eyes to giants, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, great beasts whose flesh could feed a band for weeks, whose hides could be turned into shelter, whose bones could become tools. To bring them down demanded more than courage. It demanded unity, and unity we had. Imagine the scene, dozens of lean, hungry figures moving as one, circling the massive creature. Shouts echo across the plain, stones fly, spears thrust. The mammoth charges, tusks tearing into the ground, but the hunters scatter, regroup, strike again. The beast weakens, falters, collapses. The air fills with triumph, with the scent of blood and survival. A Neanderthal could kill such a beast too. But where their bands were smaller, our gatherings were larger. Where their strength was in the arm, ours was in the many arms together. And so, though both species hunted, we hunted more, We feasted more. We multiplied more. And with multiplication came expansion. Each valley crossed, each river forded, each mountain climbed, we pressed farther into the unknown. Always restless, always seeking, always pushing the boundary of survival outward. And with each step, the Neanderthals felt the press of our presence more keenly. For them, the land had long been home. The forests of Europe, the valleys carved by glaciers, the caves worn smooth by generations, these were their inheritance. And now, into that inheritance came strangers. Not many at first, a band here, a fire there. But slowly, inevitably, more. Until the strangers were no longer visitors but neighbors. And neighbors, in a world of hunger, too easily became rivals. Still, the clash was not yet decided. For thousands of years, we lived alongside them. Sometimes fighting, sometimes mingling, sometimes ignoring one another altogether. There was no single war, no final battle. There was only the long contest, drawn across ages, measured not in victories but in survival itself. And in this contest, small advantages became decisive. We were better wanderers. Where Neanderthals remained bound to familiar lands, we crossed deserts, braved coasts, sailed even small stretches of sea. We reached islands, coasts, plains far beyond the horizon of their steppes. Each new land brought risk, but also promise, and each promise brought more life, more growth, more persistence. We were better sharers. Knowledge spread between our bands like fire leaping from branch to branch. One discovery did not remain in one place. It traveled. The best stone tools, the cleverest hunts, the safest shelters, all became common ground, and common ground became strength. We were better dreamers. Where Neanderthals buried their dead with care, we buried ours with meaning. Symbols, tokens, colors. We imagined what lay beyond death. We saw patterns in the stars, faces in the fire, stories in the hunt. And in those stories, we found courage. To dream is to believe in tomorrow, even when today is cruel. And belief in tomorrow is the most powerful survival tool of all. Thus, the balance tipped. Slowly, invisibly, across millennia. Not in a moment, not in a single battle, but in the quiet accumulation of difference. The Neanderthals endured. They fought, they survived, but their numbers dwindled. Their hold on the land weakened. And we, fragile, restless, persistent, grew stronger, more numerous, more unyielding. The dawn of humanity was also the dusk of the Neanderthals. But here, in Chapter 1, at the very beginning, that end is not yet written. The fires still burn in both camps. The hunts still feed both bands. The voices still rise in song, in story, in silence, under the same stars. Two species, one world, both human, both struggling, both alive. For now. The sun dips below the golden plains. A scattering of figures hurry home as the day's heat bleeds out of the sky, turning it the color of blood and bone. Shadows lengthen into monsters and then recede as twilight deepens. The fading light catches the silver curve of a crescent moon. This is the time when the day hunters become ghosts and the night voices stir. In the east, a lone wolf lifts its head and howls at the hidden moon. Each answering cry seems to come from the heart of darkness itself. On the cliff tops, the fires of the Neanderthal camps glow orange and red. Their leaping flames paint the weathered faces of the gathered tribe in warm, ochre light. Voices rise above the crackle of the flames, chanting in a language older than the hills. They are tales of mammoth hunts and cave bear fights, stories that have been told and retold around countless campfires, stories that need no embellishment. Their words are sharp as flint, their rhythm as steady as the heartbeat of the earth. Each phrase a stone dropped in the pool of memory, making ripples that widen and deepen long after the teller is gone. Below, on the sheltered floor of the valley, another group huddles closer to their own smaller fires. Their faces, too, are illuminated by dancing flames, but the light is softer here. the shadows less harsh. Their voices hum with different songs, carrying the lilting lilt of flutes made from bone and wood, the slap of hands, and the jangle of small bells. These are songs of journeys and discoveries, tales of trickster spirits and faraway places that only the boldest travelers can reach. There are songs of love and loss, laughter and tears, and somewhere between the notes, the echo of a creation chant, a story so ancient that it feels like coming home. Here, the tribe is smaller, the fires are lower, but there is a different kind of warmth here, a sharing of memories and stories, a connection not just to the past, but to each other. These are the early ancestors of Homo sapiens, our direct lineage, the ones who would carry destiny in their genes across the ages. And for a moment they stand in stark contrast to those chanting Neanderthals. For we know now that the Neanderthals had a culture too, a rich inner life that expressed itself in art and jewelry, in burial rituals, and even in acts of kindness toward the injured and dying. We know this because their bones have yielded fragments of DNA that whisper their history to us, and because their carefully crafted tools and hauntingly beautiful flutes have survived the millennia. But still, in this pre-dawn twilight, the difference between the two camps seems absolute. Here in the valley, the Homo sapiens stand apart, connected not only by their smaller fires, but by something more, a shared imagination, an ability to see the world not just as it is, but as it could be. There, the Neanderthals are bound together by the permanence of stone, by the harsh realities of survival. Here, the humans gather in a circle, heads bent close, listening, creating worlds inside their minds and passing them around until the boundaries of reality blur and the night is filled with magic. It's a power the Neanderthals do not share, and that might be why tonight is their last. As the darkness deepens, the night creatures begin to stir. Packs of wolves prowl the twilight, hunting deer and whatever else they can catch. High above, in the timeless expanse of the prehistoric sky, the Milky Way spills its silver across the velvet dark. The Big Dipper swings low, tracing the path of the year's turning. A shooting star streaks across the heavens, leaving a smoking tail in its wake. A hush falls over the valley people. They watch the star, and in its wake, they see visions of a future that stretches beyond anything they could imagine, a future that belongs to them. For it is in this very night sky that the spark of human imagination ignited, setting our ancestors on a path that would take them to the stars. And now the night grows colder. From the shelter of their fire, the humans see shapes moving through the trees. A deer, a wolf, a bear. But then something new appears, something different. It moves with an awkward grace, something between a loping wolf and a lumbering bear, something wild and free, yet burdened by a strange sadness. It is the last Neanderthal, a solitary male. He has wandered away from his camp, drawn by the flickering lights and the sounds of singing. He stands at the edge of the firelight, watching the humans, a living relic from a forgotten age. His shoulders sag. His eyes are dull. He smells death on the wind and knows he carries it within him, the sickness that has weakened his kind, dooming them to extinction. He is old enough to remember when the mammoth herds were thick as the trees in the forest, when the ice sheet stretched from horizon to horizon and the world was full of giants. He is old enough to remember when the two species first met when the humans arrived from the south bringing with them new ideas and ways of being ideas that the Neanderthals could not grasp, ways of being that seemed alien. Now, the last of his kind, he has seen all the others die, felt their spirits join the spirits of the forest. He has walked alone for many seasons, haunted by the ghosts of his past, searching for a new beginning that will never come. From his place at the edge of the firelight, he watches the humans play with their strange instruments, their voices weaving a tapestry of sound and light. And for a moment, he feels something stir within him, a flicker of curiosity, a spark of hope. Maybe there is a place for him here, a place where he can belong. Maybe these humans will teach him their ways, help him understand the music in his soul. But then the humans stop their singing. One of them rises, steps out of the firelight and walks toward the lone Neanderthal. At first, the man thinks he wants to talk, maybe even welcome him into their circle. But as the human approaches, he sees the glint of teeth, the flash of eyes. He smells fear and aggression and death. He turns to run, to hide in the safety of the trees. But the human is faster. He closes the distance between them in a few long strides, grabs the man by the shoulder and pulls him down. The Neanderthal struggles, but it is no use. The human's grip is like iron. He can smell fear on the Neanderthal, can taste it sweet on his lips. His companions join them, drawn by the commotion. Together they hold the Neanderthal down, biting, clawing, tearing. It is brutal, efficient, merciless. The Neanderthal fights back, his massive fists smashing into the faces and bodies of his attackers. But there are too many of them. His strength is a dwindling ember in the gathering dark. Finally, as the night deepens around them, his struggles grow weaker. His eyes lose their fire. His limbs grow heavy. With a last shudder, his spirit leaves his body and joins the spirits of the forest. In the end, the Neanderthal is nothing but a carcass, a trophy to be claimed by the victors. They drag his body to their fire and begin to strip it, their knives flashing in the firelight, revealing muscles and tendons, arteries and bones. Nothing is wasted. Every part of the kill will be used, every drop of blood will be savored. One of the humans kneels beside the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker. He's young, old enough to hunt, but not yet old enough to lead. Tonight, he has tasted blood for the first time, felt the surge of power that comes from dominating another creature. He is excited, exhilarated, but there is a shadow in his eyes, a flicker of something dark and terrible in his soul. As the other humans feast, he wanders away from the camp, back to the spot where the Neanderthal had knelt. He bends down and reaches out, touching the dead man's shoulder, cold and lifeless. And for a moment he feels a pang of sympathy, a sense of loss for a creature that is both alien and familiar, a creature that once walked the earth as master of all. It surveyed a creature that is now nothing but a memory. The boy looks up at the night sky, tracing the path of the Big Dipper as it swings low. He sees the Milky Way stretch across the heavens, a river of stars flowing endlessly through the darkness. And he wonders, not for the first time, what lies beyond the river, beyond the stars. As the night deepens, both fires burn low. The humans sleep, wrapped in furs beneath the watchful eyes of their companions. The Neanderthal is gone, his spirit returned to the earth, his body picked clean by scavengers. Only a faint outline remains where he crouched beside the fire, a ghost in the ashes. In the morning, the humans will wake and find the Neanderthal's bones. They will marvel at their bulk, their strength, their strange beauty. They will take the best pieces back to their camp, fashion them into tools and weapons, or keep them as talismans against evil spirits. They will tell stories of the encounter around their evening fires, tales that will grow in scope and grandeur with each retelling. And in those stories, the Neanderthals will become monsters, demons to be feared and vanquished, obstacles to be overcome. The humans will tell of their own bravery, their cunning, their skill, and they will forget the sadness in the eyes of the last Neanderthal. Forget the wisdom he carried in his bones, forget the song that died with him. In the morning, the Neanderthal will be nothing but a memory, a footnote in the history of a world he never knew. The humans will gather up their things and move on, following the whispers of the wind, the guidance of the stars, the call of the wild. As the sun rises, two fires flicker in the pre-dawn light, one small and bright, one big and dying. Soon the humans will pass by, drawn by the promise of a new day. But the Neanderthal will be forgotten, lost to the sands of time, his fate sealed in the ashes of his last campfire.